In the last section, we put together our node class with its constructor. Again, traditionally a node is a pretty straightforward implementation, and it's really this linked list class that's going to have a whole bunch of functionality associated with it. I'm going to flip back over to my directions HTML file. So we've now put together the node class API successfully, which means we're now going to move on to the linked list class API. We'll first start off with the constructor function at the top, which we'll use to initialize our linked list. So this constructor function is specifically made to initialize the linked list. Notice the directions right here. The directions specifically say that we should create the linked list with no head node associated with it. So when we call new linked list, there should be no nodes associated with it. Just a completely empty linked list should be returned. The linked list should have one property, which is going to be called head, and that's going to be a reference to the first node of the linked list. And by default, head should be null. So if we create the list right here and then immediately log out list.head, null should be returned. Now, the thing that's kind of interesting, I think, for a lot of beginners when they are starting to look at this linked list implementation is that when we create the linked list, it has only a reference to the head. So let's look at a diagram of that and kind of get a better idea of what's going on. So this is the linked list class that you and I are going to be working with. The linked list class is going to have a bunch of methods associated with it that make working with a linked list very easy. So methods to say insert a new node or remove a node or search for a node or whatever it might be. The linked list class is going to have exactly one property assigned to it. So it will have a bunch of functions, but there's going to be exactly one property assigned to it, and that will be the head property. This head property will have a reference to the first node of the linked list. So in truth, the linked list class has no idea about, say, how many nodes belong to the linked list, or what data exists in the linked list. The linked list class only knows about the first node right here, and if it wants to answer any questions about the linked list itself or the actual data, then it needs to crawl over the linked list and say, count up the number of nodes if it wants to know that information. So the linked list has very little hard information associated with it. All it really knows is the first node. And it's going to be up to you and me when we put together all these handy methods for working with the linked list to write some code to access first this head node and then crawl through the linked list and work through it in some meaningful fashion. So that's where all the difficulty with this linked list is going to come from. You and I are going to have to write code to access just the head and then work with all the other elements inside there. Okay, so with that in mind, let's put together our constructor now that we have a better idea of exactly what the purpose of the linked list class is. So over in my code editor, I'm going to find my linked list class. I'll give myself a little bit of space, and we're going to define the constructor, which I really just can't spell apparently. So constructor, yep, looks good. Now thinking back to the document right here, it says specifically we need to initialize a head property, and by default, head should be null. So the constructor is going to be really straightforward. We're simply going to say this.head equals null. As you'll see in practice very shortly, a real usage of the linked list would be to do something like, say, const list equals new linked list, and then we might create a new node and associate it with this list. So we could say list.head equals new node, and maybe the data we want to store in this node is something like 10. So now our linked list has a head node associated with it. And now this head right here could have additional nodes linked onto it, which we could associate by making new nodes. Okay, so that's pretty much it for our constructor. Really pretty straightforward. So let's take a break right here. I am going to clean up the code right here. So let's clean that up. We're going to pause right now. By the way, there are no more tests that are associated with the constructor right here. There will be tests for the next method we implement. So let's break right now. We'll continue in the next video and start working on one of the more interesting methods around our linked list. So I'll see you in just a minute.